Good afternoon. Welcome to the Red Hen Press Reading and Conversation afternoon. Although it is afternoon here, but it is evening on the East Coast. We have with us Tess Taylor, Didi Jackson, and Jason Schneiderman, and two of them are on the East Coast. I think they might be having a glass of wine. I'm not sure Tess Taylor and I are quite at our wine stage yet, but we'll see if we get there. All three of them will be reading from their new poetry books, and we will be having a conversation with them afterwards. So without further ado, we are starting off with Didi Jackson.
Hi, Didi Jackson. I'm coming from Vermont. I'm coming in virtually from South Burlington, Vermont, and I'll be reading from Moonjar, newly released and the day before my birthday, April 21st. And yeah, so I thought that what I might do is, interestingly enough, read the first poem and the last poem, and in the middle I'm going to read a new poem, and I'll explain why. So the very first poem in the book is titled Signs for the Living. Signs for the living. Sometimes after the last snow in May, after the red-winged blackbird clutches the spine of the cattail, after he leans forward, droops his wings and flashes his epaulets, I imagine shouldering the yellow center lines of the road. Near the recently thawed pond, within a long channel of construction, a man holding a sign. One side says, slow, the other, stop. Joy and sorrow always run like parallel lines. Inside the house, when I leave the lights on, small white moths come like a collection of worship, pulsing their wings up and up the window, as if in a frenzied trance-like dance. Some dervishes, others the penitent on shaky knees. The first few years after my husband's suicide, I wanted to be the penitent. I thought I deserved all the pain I could feel. The drill of roadwork in late summer was a welcome, grinding music. Now, the yellow center lines are flung like braids behind me. The next poem I'm going to read is a new poem, and I wanted to read it because with being in social distancing and not being outside so much, we have a family of foxes that have made their home under our shed in our backyard. And we've had the pleasure of watching this mom and these four, I was calling them pups, apparently they're kits, romp around our backyard. I had to be careful for the cat and the dog now. But I thought I'd read a poem I have called The Fox in honor of my newly adopted fox family. The Fox. One red fox crosses Route 100, skittering past our front tires. A few yards up, another. We could be near or half a world from our home. Wheeling in our seats, we try to catch a glimpse of these two fiery hymns, their chanting footsteps crossing the familiar spine of a road. I bless your ears and eyes and remember that last winter we watched a fox span a snowy field, pause, then call the other, as if with small bits of thunder. And it was then I asked myself, how should I live? The dead have no lovers, and I was young and dead until you swerved enough. Four young birches penciling the road sag, knowing that everything almost dies and then does. For what are our eyes? For what are our ears? Into whose mouth are we followed? That night, we are kept awake by the moon, following the mountain's ridge like the tracery of a child. In the morning, all the lines are erased. We have coffee, read the news, and see shards of red flashing across our screens. And my last poem is the last poem in the book, and it is also the title poem, Moonjar. And in it, It explains the idea of the ceramic moon jar, and more than that. Moon jar. My wedding ring is missing one small diamond, and I like it that way. A reminder of the imperfect in all of us, like that keyhole size of grief that remains crystalline. In Korea, ceramicists for centuries have made moon jars, testimony to the virtue of modesty, asymmetrical warping on the wheel, slumping in the pine-heated kiln, impurities when fired, black dots and pocks on its surface like freckles on skin. I have been kept awake so many nights by the moon, its pull on the pines and night birds, and who, like a monk, keeps a sharp order of time. Never a perfect sphere, the milky moon jar joins two clay hemispheres into one. When the light of the moon finds me, I am the color of everything in the winter night. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I love that moon jar poem. I always come back to that one and think about that. Thank you so much. So our next reader is right here from California, Tess Taylor.
Hi, Kate. I'm here in El Cerrito, California, which I spent 10 years writing a book about. And this book is called Rift Zone, partly because we're living on a fault line in more ways than one. I want to thank Red Hen for making space for poems in this really strange time, in this like silent, dangerous, fearful, kind of upending and beautiful moment that we're in. Terrifying and also revelatory, I think maybe more than beautiful. Didi, that was such a great reading. I love being with you. About 6 years ago, my husband contracted a pneumonia that was resistant to antibiotics and almost died. And so he's immunocompromised, and we're particularly careful about leaving the house. But I also had an early taste of what it was like to live at the edge of a disease that people didn't know how to solve. So I thought I'd read from this part of the book. The poem is called Song with Pneumonia and Telemon. Mountains lost in clouds, woman in roadside rain, refinery silos tumoring the hill. The bay heaves daily, systole, diastole through blasted estuaries. I follow the path Deanza charted, now freeway to the hospital. Taylor inside, week 3, a mystery. All diseases partly drug resistant, says our brusque nurse. Terrifying illness unexplained. On my iPhone, a Telemann sonata, arpeggios progressing scales. In Taylor's lungs, liters of yellow fluid. Bennett says caboose, says knuckle coupler, says buckle, puzzle, horn. Bennett feels untainted joy in engines, but when I park in San Francisco and chart my breath beside the beeping monitor my love is hooked to, I read the toxins in the tide. Today, tubes, a 5th antibiotic. My husband struggling for his pneuma, spongy tubules in his lungs' great cloud. The scales grow furious. The song is cycling. When did it begin this wild crescendo? At the 7th antibiotic, they'll give up. Doctors take him for another test. Redwoods can drink fog. Their needles sip the numinous. Redwoods make their own groundwater. My love is elsewhere being scanned. I dream the limbs of old growth forest. Beyond my perch, my Telemann, someone is responding, not responding. Each engine, each mortal machine. Now another body carted in. I perch on this electric bed. Biotic, antibiotic, we are rocking. I dream that I can be my husband's fog. I dream our lungs as cloud, as tidal skein. I think I'm going to be like Didi and read one new poem for this moment. We're in this neighborhood, and behind us is a graveyard, and the parks are closed, so we go walking in the graveyard quite a lot. The other thing that I should say is that right now I would have been on a plane to go bury my grandmother who died right before this pandemic started. And she was 102. So I wrote a poem a little bit about that. Under Junco's The Baby Stones. Grandmother, child of 1918, so soon half orphaned, mother dead of that flu. Your father, widowed, angry, afraid, taped your mouth shut to keep you from crying. You lay alone in the crib until you could be sent to relatives. This February, your raw end came. You arrived at the far edge of your long century on one of the last mornings your daughters could sing to you. With love, my aunts eased you out, offered hymns to the verge. Now your ashes wait. We cannot bury you. A continent away, I walk in a graveyard. Under Juncos, find the 1918 graves. Baby stones fracture in live oak shadows. Pain is a rotting limb in my shoulder. My children grow feral. I feed them and feed them. I scour all my cupboards looking for tenderness. You find it a wonder I can't clean the house. Pour yourself vodka while I struggle with bed sheets. Light a cigarette, then follow me quizzically. All these dead, all these dead. How will their great-granddaughters mourn them? No one can answer me in this century. One day I feel your ghost climb inside me. She hurts. A torn tree, a broken wing. She uncovers the scar she was always hiding. We are so rusty, we are a broken spigot. All the dead mothers, all the dead mothers. Your old pain, this spring wind, my mouth now open. I could not cry. Now I howl for you. And I thought I would just leave with an earthquake poem, a fault line poem. Right up here is a town called Olima, and it is the epicenter of the 1906 earthquake. February, buckeye unscissor new leaves, cows pasture, buffleheads paddle, a kestrel perches on a bishop pine. Now just above us, the mountain's humped spine pushes north to Alaska. Extinct invertebrates ride sea cliffs through time. Even these stones have lost cousins in Mexico. Even this freshet is landmass torn open. Even these rocks are reft from each other. Each shelf pulses onward, a restless swimmer looking for land, though nothing is still. Gray whales swim through ocean explosions along continents forged of cracked dispossession. Sunset today, the ridges grow luminous. Sharp air, dark spice, horses exhaling. They stomp on the cold, steaming, visible earth. We heat the stove. The children are napping. The cabins, the raft on which we are floating. Below us, the crust is molten, is nationless. We only light our lamps on the rift. Thank you.
Love that. I love the whole idea of your book with the many rifts that you refer to throughout the book, which I think are becoming more and more apparent during this time of coronavirus, the many rifts that cleave America. So our next reader is Jason Schneiderman, coming to us from Brooklyn.
Hi, I am coming to you from Brooklyn. This is my new book, Hold Me Tight. Didi and Tess, it is so fantastic to be reading with you guys. I love being with you anywhere that I can be. And Kate, it is wonderful to be with you. And cheers, America. I'm going to read 3 poems from the new book, 2 from the final sequence, and 1 from another sequence. The Last War. And this is from a sequence of last things. The Last War. The project was simple, though initially most people regarded it as misguided. We removed everyone under the age of 12 from every armed conflict. Anyone from 12 to 18 could stay and fight or go, up to them. Adults left in war zones were sterilized, using a gas cloud that could be wafted over battlefields, starving the conflicts of new combatants. Many people were sure that the children, raised abroad by strangers, would continue the conflicts. But having anticipated that probability, plans were carefully developed. The adoptive parents were instructed to give contradictory answers, saying things like, oh, wait, no, your parents were Sunni, not Shia, or maybe Sufi, or no, I'm fairly sure you were Irish, or was it English? If the children demanded proof, our office created specially forged family trees to show one Hutu and one Tutsi parent, or one conquistador and one Aztec parent, or one Nazi and one Jew. It took a long time, generations, and our critics likened it to genocide or ethnic cleansing, and in a way, it was. But every person on the planet watched the last war with great pity, the last 2 survivors of some ancient conflict, the war zones having gotten smaller and smaller, easily monitored with drones and satellite imaging. The last combatant shot the second to last combatant, and he rejoiced to have won, to have claimed for all his ancestors the piece of land that he would hold until he died under quarantine. He didn't ask to be let out. We knew we wouldn't let him, and so he died, king of his shrunken domain. And after that, we went in, forgetfully, purposefully insistent on forgetting, determined to make no new history, to remember as little as possible. We have destroyed the archives. We have shredded and wiped and erased and burned. We have diaries in which we tear out the pages as soon as we fill them, and on the shelves we store nothing more than the empty book covers. We are visionary, we believe, in our belief that there will be no more fighting, as long as there is nothing to fight about. This next poem is for Fanny Imlay, who is the younger half-sister of Mary Shelley. And I think most of the information about her is in the poem. In Memoriam, Fanny Imlay, 1794 to 1816. When you ask yourself how people survived the 19th century, before soap and antibiotics, before anesthesia and electricity, remember, not all of them did. Remember Fanny Imlay in her hotel room drafting her suicide note before drinking laudanum. Remember the innkeeper who found her corpse and tore her name from the bottom of the note so she could be buried in Christian ground. Remember Fanny Imlay's final words, offering the blessing of forgetting that such a creature ever existed as I, remainder torn away. And I'm going to read the last poem in the book to close this reading, which is The Last Black Hole. The last black hole was not the last. The last black hole was everything in the entire universe collapsed into a space even smaller than you can imagine. The last black hole was the end of time, and then it exploded into a new time, and then there was a whole new universe, the one we know. And what is coming at the next black hole will be another whole new universe, but not the one we know. The one coming will be a universe where nothing of us will have survived, not even the tiniest speck, except maybe the rediscovered truth that there was a time in which we lived, though this truth will be our truth, not theirs, but you knew that. didn't you, that every truth we have is a human truth? That as long as we're the ones looking, everything will always look like us. And as sure as every human will be born and die, there is only our time, our journey to the black hole and our journey away from it. And don't be discouraged. We do not give birth astride the grave, as some have said, but rather we are born into a picture in which we are only a pixel. And as the pigment shall never know the painting, so we are fixed within our place. And we must not fear because we cannot see the design. And this I call faith, knowing that the last black hole is coming. And on the other side will be time and space. And on the other side will be time and space. And on the other side will be time and space, but without us.
Thank you. Well, it's great to be here with all three of you. I'm very excited about all of these books coming out. So I thought I'd start off with a question that has to do with the attention your books has been getting, the bigger conversations that have been swirling about your books, and find out sort of what you have been excited about in terms of those conversations. What do you feel has been generating some good conversations? What are you excited about in terms of what's happening with your book? So I'd like to start with you, Didi.
Oh, sure. My book coming out, last week now, officially, which was very, very exciting. Also, I have to admit, very scary. The subject matter of my book is a very personal one that deals with suicide. I write about being a survivor of suicide loss, and the movement of dealing with that reality, and then of course coming to terms with a new life and a new way of being in the world, and finding new love and entering into a space of that and new love. I've been fortunate that several poems from the book have been shared on various, kind of, I guess, Poem a Day, Poetry Daily, and Lit Hub had a poem, Almost Animal Up, and I will be having, in your own words, the Poetry Society of America, where I get to talk about the poem Ribolita, particularly from the book, which is a night. I was happy to be able to talk about that one. I get to explain what Ribolita is. Major and I, my husband, just made Ribolita I think it was last week, and it's this peasant soup, but also how to fold new love with the existing pain and that constant pain, like I mentioned in the poem Moonjar a few minutes ago, that remains crystalline inside of us. It remains like this core moment of grief. So I feel that is what I'm really kind of excited about, is to share those that kind of experience. Yeah.
That's great. I think all of these different ways that the Poetry Society of America, the Academy, and Poetry Daily have been putting up these poems. Mm-hmm. I know that for myself, I feel that that our lives have slowed down to the pace of poetry, oddly, during the coronavirus. And weirdly, I got the Poem a Day from the Academy before this, but I rarely had time to read those poems because I was hurrying, and now I do. And I'm working very hard in my own little casita, but somehow I have time to read these poems now, maybe because I'm not driving. And so I think that a lot more people are having time for poetry at this point. So that's great that your poems are appearing in all these different places. And obviously we're seeing that in terms of book sales. So Tess, I know you've got 2 books coming out, and you've definitely been seeing some attention with your book. So tell us what's been going on there.
Well, my book Rift Zone is fundamentally about this feeling of living in a precarious time and a precarious place. The fault lines of America being actually the literal fault line in my backyard, but also, fire seasons that run through, the fact that we have no social safety net and 28,000 people are homeless in the Bay Area, that when you live here, and by here I mean maybe my neighborhood in California, but I also mean in America, there's always a there but for fortune mode, you know, whether it's going to be, what is the crisis that's going to come and get you and your life. And so it was interesting because I was writing into this mode, partly coming back to California where I grew up and seeing this landscape newly. But I feel like this book has hit at this moment where people are really openly talking about how precarious our existence is, like this precarity that we all live with, this fear that like it could be taken away. Whatever we hold on to could be swept away quickly. And so the poems were on the California Report, which is a KQED, like a public radio show, did a feature on them, on releasing a book about apocalypse and during a kind of apocalyptic moment. And there was a poem in the New York Times, a poem actually that had the kind of combination of lullabies and viruses, which, you know, are both these really old codes that we pass down. Lullabies and viruses are both things that we kind of share with our children. So that's been cool. I mean, it's been really interesting. It's lonely. It's a lonely way to launch a book. I really want to have a glass of wine with everyone right now, not just Jason and Didi. Extrovert in me is aching, I gotta say. But in terms of actually talking about what these poems are about, it's been sort of a fascinating synchronicity.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Jason, how are you doing?
I'm good. I mean, you know, the classroom visits have started and the, you know, lining up the podcasts and getting the reviews and, you know, sort of just doing various kinds of things. And it's been really interesting how, for the first time in a while, I feel what you were saying about America has slowed down to the speed of poetry. Everyone has met me in my neuroses, that suddenly my neurotic, fearful, angry, you know, difficulty is sort of how we're all feeling. And so it's been really interesting to hear from a lot of people about how my work has been giving voice to something that now feels like a common feeling, that with my first few books that I think I often, in responding to my work, people often felt that I was very quirky or that I had a very different perspective or that I was, you know, doing something, I was seeing the world in a way that they weren't. Mm-hmm. And so with this book, it's been really interesting. I don't know if it's really gratifying or terrifying that people are saying to me, yes, I feel exactly that way too. And the opening book in the poem, the final sequence of poems in the book are about last things, but the first poem in the book is about living with rage and kind of living with just a constant sense of fury about the world and sort of what I did to escape it, what I did to what I did to hold it in and what I did to let it go. And for so many people to be kind of finding that something that resonates right now, it's sort of wonderful, but also I wish we weren't all here together. I wish I were still sort of out on the ice floe being weird on my
own. Last week when we did this reading and conversation, we were talking with Deborah Lott, and she has a book, Don't Go Crazy Without Me. And she said that when she launched it, she thought that people would think she's a crazy hypochondriac Jewish woman. Like she's out there. But now people don't seem to be thinking that, because other people feel sort of hypochondriac too. Like there's just waves of people thinking that they have the coronavirus. And so we all have our own waves of hypochondriac feelings now. And she doesn't feel like she's nearly as crazy as she originally thought. So don't go crazy without me. So I wanted to also talk a little bit about for each of you, you're all teaching, And that has obviously proven to be a bit of an adventure, I'm sure, for all of you. I was talking with Tess the other day, just as she was about to dive into her Zoom conversations. And Jason, obviously, we've been talking, and you've been Zooming, and Didi, I'm sure you have been Zooming. And as Toby likes to say, as when Zoom has crashed a couple times, Zoom wasn't made for 320 million Americans. But I guess Zoom is figuring things out. But what is that experience like? And Jason, I know you and I have talked about how, one of the things with teaching is that when students are on their best behavior in a classroom, they're on each other's side, and they're there to help each other. And when they're on their worst behavior, they're like third graders, you're fat, you're ugly, you're weird, you're dirty,
Yeah.
And so there's something about not being in the room together that doesn't necessarily bring out their best selves. And you, as the person who's supposed to bring them together, have to sort of be the grown-up in the room. Didi, how's that going for you?
Well, I am teaching two classes this semester, but I haven't been Zooming with my students who are potentially watching right now. I hope I invited them to watch. And as well as the other thing I wanted to say that kind of related back to the previous question was, another reason that the book was also scary for me as it's coming out was I have many of my previous students who also knew my deceased husband who were very interested also, I think, in reading this. And I knew that was going to be out there for them as well. So I haven't been Zooming. I've been Zooming socially a lot. Mm-hmm. Okay. I need a happy hour or two. But I taught online for many years prior to even moving to Vermont when I was living in Florida. And I kind of modeled the way I set up my class this time. It's a literature course. It's African-American poetry. It's not a creative writing course. I think if it were a creative writing course where I needed to give a kind of immediate feedback, we would be Zooming. But it's different. And so I just modeled the way I formatted. Like when we shifted, I just shifted it immediately to and so we didn't need to do that. So it's been, I've been trying, to be available to them constantly on email, any time of the day, even in the evenings. And also the other thing I'm trying to be aware of is the situations and the circumstances of their home life that might lead to a difficulty, not being able to have privacy, not being able to have time to think, take caregiving, sick family members also. So, there's all these really interesting and scary sometimes situations that we're navigating around right now as I think teachers. Yeah.
Right. I've been doing some of that kind of teaching too. I have not had to Zoom with my students. I just talk with them on the phone and that kind of thing. How's it going for you, Tess?
There's these moments in class that are dead or sort of spinny, like moving breakout rooms, and feels like these kind of pixelated portals, like I'm in a Tesseract machine that I never really wanted to be in. But there's other moments, like I only teach on Tuesdays now. On Thursdays, I have these office hours that are just drop in as much as you want and chat with me. And then I make a little audio lecture. Mm-hmm. And the reason I make an audio lecture is so that you can take a little meditation on poetry to the grocery store or while you're cleaning the house. So I don't want people to feel like they have to spend even more hours attached to a screen. And I also think poetry is portable in that way. We have gone really low tech, like we just listen to each other and comment, kind of a la Marie Ponceau at the 92nd Street Y, just listen and say what struck your ear. I think there's a way that I also have slowed down a little more. I'm genuinely a person who usually tries to do too much. But, why not spend a whole hour describing or discussing all of the things that are magical about Keats's Bright Star, and then try to write a poem that makes a wish and then wishes against the wish and twists in this way that I feel like the poetry class, also people come to the office hours just, I think, to be nourished a little bit. And sometimes I'm too fast in my life. And this is one place where suddenly I feel like, okay, I get it. It's okay to be slow here. And it's okay to savor this. And it's okay to let us ourselves just experience breath. And breath is this newly miraculous thing to all of us right now.
Well, yes, my life hasn't slowed down at all. It's like I've been on Zoom for like hours and hours and hours.
After my teaching is terrible, but
well,
slower.
And one of the first things I did.
Jason, you're teaching 4 classes though, right?
3 right now. I have release time, so I'm down to 3. And one of the first things I did was I asked my students, one, I warned them. I said that in a situation like this, what you're going to feel is afraid and ashamed. And fear makes people lash out and become violent and mean. And shame makes us afraid to ask for help. We feel like we can't ask for the help that we need. And so just track those feelings. If you're feeling like you're going to lash out at someone, like recognize that that's probably covering up fear. If you see someone else lashing out, that probably means they're afraid. And if you need help and you feel like you can't ask for it, that's probably shame and you need to ask for it. And then I asked my students, and I put this as a quiz in their Blackboard space, to tell me what kind of a laptop they were using and to tell me what their biggest obstacle to completing this semester was. And because I am at a community college, and we've worked really hard to make sure that things like the food pantry stay open, that we're getting students access to the kind of devices that they need. But I can tell you, I have one student who told me that she is the mother of 4 school-age children, and they are all sharing one laptop. So my students are the most resilient people in the world. I have students who are in my queer film class whose parents don't know they're gay and are, how are they supposed to watch a movie when I'm assigning a Derek Jarman film that might have a little penis in it, when this might get them exercised a second time. So my students, I have actually tried to move things onto Zoom, and I've told my students, I usually teach introductory and foundational courses. And I've said to my students is that the more foundational the course is, the fewer assumptions we share. And the fewer assumptions that we share, the more we need to see each other and kind of check in on those. And the more sophisticated we are, and the further along we get in a subject matter, and the more we kind of think in common, the more we can kind of move into distance mode. So I've been actually trying to keep pretty close. But I had a student who, she Zoomed into class from a bus. I was amazed. She's a home health aide, and she didn't want to miss class, and so she was Zoomed in from a bus.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is
my students are amazing. I love my students.
Yeah, that is great. That is great. I like what you're saying, that you have more in common. I mean, it's easier to keep track of the graduate students. There's no doubt about it. Yeah. So I wanted to ask each of you a question about your books. So Jason, I'll start with you. Your first book with Red Hen was chosen for the Ben Saltman Award by Douglas Kearney. And it was a wonderful book. But when you sent us this book, I really felt like you had kind of gone in a different direction. It's I always like to see that someone didn't just give me another version of the same book, and certainly you had not. You had really gone in a different direction. Maybe you could say a less playful direction. This book seems very intense, and I'm curious, what was your intention? What was your thinking about here?
Yeah. So the last book, Primary Source, was very much a kind of investment in my own personal canon. And when I wrote the book, and when I published the book, I thought that it was a kind of canon that everyone shared, that everyone was invested in Sylvia Plath, and everyone was invested in Gertrude Stein, and all these kinds of Shakespeare plays and these sorts of things. And as I read from that book, I realized that they weren't. that I actually did have a more individuated canon than I had realized. And as I kept reading from that book, it began to feel like an elegy. It began to feel like an elegy for a kind of modernist set of common texts that emerged somewhere in the mid-century, and that I was actually mourning it as much as I was celebrating it. And I think that the kind of the dominant note in the new book is grief. and elegy. And I really leaned into that idea of elegy and grief. I did have a personal experience that I wrote about that opened something for me that I kind of went through. And then that is what sort of let me get to the sequences that shape this book. And I hope that they're kind of hopeful elegies. I hope that, I read 2 of those pieces of last things. And with each of the last things that I wrote about, the question was sort of, what would I miss? If I was writing about war, everyone wants war to end. But what is it about war that would be gone, that you would want back? And so with this book, I do think it was a kind of the elegiac mode and the kind of underlying grief, I think is a much more dominant note than it had been in my previous work. And so it was kind of a way of loving the world by imagining what might happen if I let parts of it go.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I hear that. I hear those notes in it. It was great, and it was great hearing you read at AWP, and it's great hearing you read again. Didi, so I was telling you before we started the show that when I first read your book, it reminded me of one of my favorite books, which is Gabriel by Edward Hirsch, and I really that's always been kind of an book for me. And so when I read your book, I immediately thought of that book. And I thought how many people would love this book. And I wonder, what you've been, as you've been walking out with this book. I know Major Jackson has a book coming out at the same time. You guys have been doing some dual events. You've been doing some events by yourself. But tell us a little bit about how this book, came into being, and then what it's been like doing some events with your husband and some by yourself.
Sure. So right after the suicide, I couldn't write a word, as you can imagine. My very dear friend, Michelle Randall, would bring magazines and scissors to my house, and we cut and pasted initially, just kind of as a way to start creating again, which then led to some words on the page, which then led to poems. And then I realized these poems started becoming a little therapeutic. I don't like using that word because I don't think that's necessarily, when I'm teaching a course, I don't ever want anyone to think that I have a degree in therapy and that I am capable of helping anybody get through anything. Of course, I want to be open and available to my students or anyone that's in the course. But the book so these poems started emerging, and I found myself wanting to talk about this and wanting to talk about this subject. And then I found that it emerged into, I had a collection of poems large enough for a manuscript. Figuring out, though, during that time and during the time of writing, I met my current husband now, Major. And so poems were also emerging about new love and a new life. And this kind of what I call a little mini renaissance in a way, a rebirth. The middle section of the book takes place on the island of Seraphos in Greece. And I kind of think in this really crazy metaphorical way, that's where that happened, it seems so mythical and unbelievable, but it really, really kind of did. It's true. This is true. And so thinking about how to put that book together, the first section is the really what I call the tough section, which is really the nitty gritty of all I don't want to say the details because that's not what the book is about, of course, but the reality of that. Then the middle section is this kind of this new self-discovery, and then this kind of new life. I was nervous about this. And I remember when I was first reading these poems out loud, I felt really scared. And I remember after I read, I would just feel kind of horrible about reading it. And so another good friend of mine, who's a nurse, said to me, why are you afraid? I go, I feel like I'm passing on my pain. And she's like, no. She's like, I need this book. I know somebody right now whose husband has taken his life, and she needs this book. And that was before it was before it was a book. And then I realized, oh, okay, what I'm doing is I'm maybe like trying to help, understand the situation, bring it to light, remind people that they're not alone, remind people that if they need help, if they need to get help for mental health issues, to do it. And that there's no stigma around it. And then for those who have suffered from that and are survivors of suicide loss, that there can be this kind of second phase or third phase to their life. So that was the process. But it took me a minute to believe that. I taught high school for many years. I taught high school with my deceased husband, and we shared the same students, and we took them on trips. We went to New York every year to all the museums. I taught art history, which is why art plays a big component. Visual art plays a big component in the book. And so I was so scared for them because I was a protector of their being, that I was afraid for them to hear this too. And I think I was just kind of projecting that out. But she really helped me understand that it's better for it to be in the world and for us to be talking about this and talking. And I wanted to say also, even right now with social distancing and us isolated and in spaces like that we're not used to, like you were saying, Jason, your students whose parents don't even know that they're gay. I worry about mental health and safety of everybody right now in this time. So I was a little tentative. Even that was my go-to, is to be a little tentative about it. But I constantly steady myself and think, no, this needs to be said. We need to talk about this, and we need to remind everybody that there is a hotline and you can talk to people, now. So yeah.
No, I think that's great. I also like to remind my students that I'm not a therapist. I actually go so far as to say, not only am I not a therapist, I never even went to therapy, and I needed it. So if you think I'm going to offer therapeutic advice, think again. If you need therapy, get some. I am a writing teacher because, it's for some reason when you're teaching creative writing, students like to lob you questions that they should be talking to a therapist about. I do not know why. I know they don't do this to their math teachers.
You might be surprised. You should confirm that with math teachers.
We should talk to the math and chemistry teachers.
Yeah.
So Tess, you didn't end up reading the last poem in your book, but the last poem in your book was the one that made me just go like, oh my God, you're killing me. You're just killing me when I first read this book.
I'll read it soon. I'll read it at the next one.
Yeah, well, we'll have to see if we get one last round where we each read one more poem. We'll see if you can read that one.
Cool.
But when Tess and I first talked about this book, you said this book really belongs with the California press, and it did kind of belong with the California press. It would have been a shame for this to be published in New York or Minneapolis, for God's sake, because this is a very California book, and it's funny because I think of all the big riffs in this book, it is about the California riffs more than anything else. But you did go ahead and write a book that is coming out in New York as well. Tell us about this, the 2-book situation.
So this is, it was kind of crazy. In a way, these 2 books, this book is called Last West, and it is collaged out of the journals of Dorothea Lange, the photographer, the Great Depression photographer. I started going to her archive 2 years ago, and as well as being a photographer, who was documenting shelterlessness and migrancy in the 30s, and also Japanese internment in the 40s. She had these incredible road notes, and they were gathering up quotes from the side of the road. They were very detailed explorations of like what people need to get by. And the staccato rhythm of them in my head really just felt like I could hear a gesture towards poetry. She had this incredible ear for people talking on the side of the road. Like people would say, I wouldn't undertake to farm this land no more, or this country's a hard country. When you die, you're dead. That's all. And boy, that feels like a very American line, and it feels like it's through time, but it's also pretty contemporary. And as I mentioned before, we're living through a mass epidemic of shelterlessness here in the Bay Area and in California. It is wild. And so thinking about who has taught us to see the dignity of people who are living in tents, and the fact that I see people living in tents on my way to my children's school. You know, I pass through 4 encampments on my bicycle. And so she became a person that was in my mind, her sort of dedication, her pursuit of artistry, the fact that she was from Berkeley. And she also photographed El Cerrito, this neighborhood that I'm from, and she photographed part of its beautifulness, which was its like tiny bungalows settled by shipyard workers coming out of the Dust Bowl, and America going back to work in the 40s and the new California. And she also photographed something very ugly that happened here, which is Japanese internment. And so that fascination with the violence that's right under the soil, she also helped me learn to see and name those things. So she's in my mind, and I begin this project. And lo and behold, I have the good luck of connecting with a curator at the Museum of Modern Art who likes the poems and wants to include them in an exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art, Dorothea Lange, Words and Pictures. And for those of you that are looking for something to do, MoMA is doing a wonderful project called MoMA Virtual Views. And it is pretty much the nicest way to go to a museum from home that I've found yet. It'll be like podcast and a little video, and Sally Mann and the curator are going to talk live tomorrow night, and I have a podcast up. So if you, just a little plug for the fact that Dorothea Lange, whose work is incredibly relevant, her pictures are on the wall of the Museum of Modern Art, but the museum is dark. And so this notion that she's silenced just at the moment we need to remember her focus on our common dignity and on our need for common well-being. There she is in the Museum of Modern Art. You can take a sneak peek in tomorrow night, and through this week especially, there's this virtual views. I guess I wanted to say that it was cool that the Museum of Modern Art found me, like super cool, like hooray. But also, I really thought about her as a woman, as a Californian, as an activist, as somebody who was on the line between journalism and documentary and also real artistic pursuit. She was incredibly skilled as a portraitist. How to like blend the aesthetic and the beautiful with the outraged, like using beauty to seduce us and also outrage to prod us towards something better. I think that she and I see some of the same paradoxes in California, the beauty and the racism. And so the beauty and the precariousness. So it was like a gift. It was a gift. And in some ways, I feel like these books are like cousins and almost a diptych, like, you know, 2 sides of the same piece of artwork. So yeah, it was just really incredible to be allowed to circle my thoughts in a complete way. It's been pretty incredible.
Well, I'd love to just end with each of you reading one very short poem. And since I've already assigned Tess already knows which one she's reading. The other 2 of you can find your short poem while Tess is reading. Tess, take it away.
This poem is called Envoy San Francisco, and it is based on a true fact, which is that under the .com buildings are actually the wrecks of shipwrecks. People arrived in San Francisco, 49ers, and they abandoned their ships and left them to rot in order to go and pursue gold. So anyway, Envoy San Francisco. The number of the ships, wharves, and other infrastructure of San Francisco's Gold Rush waterfront lie buried beneath the streets and sidewalks. Gold Rush Port, maritime archaeology of San Francisco's waterfront. City of shipwrecks, city of water, sandhill where mountain lions prowled above windjammers, city whose first Anglo historians proclaimed themselves to be the only modern progress and promised to sweep away forerunners who wanted to bind the world's many peoples with their new port, do to China what the British had done to India, but sooner. City of gold rush, bust and boom, city of mudflat, of private wharves, buildings to ships, ships into buildings, forest to everything, city of old growth and redwood pilings, city of whores and Mackinaw blankets, of Irish whiskey and fireproof paint, of schooners abandoned for gold fields, the Niantic, the Apollo, the General Harrison, city whose abandoned ships became floating opium dens next to floating prisons, city of otter pelts and shovel salesmen whose white settlers funded their own micro-genocides, city of quick fires and tallow and opium, of myrrh eggs stolen off the Farallones, city of landfill and movable real estate where right now a woman in underwear howls in the street and a barefoot teenager scratches his sores and an addict begged the last of my rice just outside this room where I am writing. City of fault line, city of water, as much as of anywhere, I am of you. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to read a short poem to end on called Golden Shovel Buddha, which is the golden shovel. The last line from Gwendolyn Brooks is, when we speak to each other, our voices are a little gruff. So Golden Shovel Buddha. A warrior I am not, even when I try my hardest. I am a disciple of we, a follower of union, and I speak clearly of the rickshaw of love to anyone who will listen. Each of us must come to the edge of the other, either in this life or the next. Ours is a marriage sifted from mistakes and old voices, ticked like a wristwatch, a reminder we are on a well-worn path, king-sized and cherry, like a carved Buddha reclining in a gift shop window, whose little hands are like all hands, full of patience and a little gruff.
And I'm going to read, there's a sequence of poems about wolves, and this is the second parable of the wolves. Wolf loves fox, which wolves don't do. Wolf loves fox, which makes all the other wolves hate him. All the wolves are named Wolf, which usually works fine, but now that Wolf loves fox, they need a name to drive him from them. They call him Fox-Loving Wolf, and the wolves drive him from the forest with Fox and Fox-Loving Wolf live in a field, which suits Fox just fine. At the end of their lives, Fox reveals that he was really a wolf. Fox-Loving Wolf starts to cry and says, "Why would you do that to me? I gave up everything for you and I didn't have to." Fox, but really Wolf, says, "It was the only way I could be sure of you. I had to know you would give everything up for me."
Thank you. Thank you all so much for being here. Toby will make sure that at the end of this broadcast, everyone knows how to buy your books and buy them quickly. Thank you all so much. Thank you all for showing us your beautiful books and your beautiful faces. And it's so good to see you all. And I hope that by the end of 2020, I can have a glass of champagne with every single one of you.
So too.
Thank you.
And thank you for bringing us together, Kate. And thank you for these beautiful books.
Yes. Have a good evening. Yes. Okay.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.